Welcome to the Dark Lore, where ancient worlds breathe in the darkness, and every night is a passage into something older than memory. Tonight, you will travel further than you have ever traveled before, past the edges of every map you have ever seen, past the last mountains and the last rivers and the last forests, to a place that exists in the space between legend and truth. A place that most people believe is only a story told by travelers who have had too much to drink in too many taverns on too many cold nights. They are wrong. The place is real. It is called the Dragon's Graveyard, and it lies in a vast and ancient valley surrounded on all sides by mountains so tall their peaks are permanently lost in clouds. Mountains that were old when the world was young. Mountains that have watched everything that has ever happened in this part of the earth with the patient indifference of things that will still be standing when everything else is gone. In the valley between those mountains, there is a field. The field is enormous, stretching from one side of the valley to the other, flat and wide, and covered in a grass that is not quite the color of any grass you have seen before, darker and more silver, as though the moonlight has soaked into it over so many centuries that it has become part of what the grass fundamentally is. And in that field, half buried, worn smooth by time and weather and the slow, patient work of centuries, but still unmistakably and completely present, are bones. The bones of dragons. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. This is where they came to die, at the end of everything, and tonight, impossibly and inexplicably, and with complete certainty, this is where you will sleep. The road to the Dragon's Graveyard does not appear on any map, which is not surprising because the road itself seems uncertain of its own existence, appearing and disappearing between the rocks and the dark grass, as though it cannot quite decide whether it wants to be found or whether being found is something it has any particular opinion about. You have been following it for what feels like a very long time, through country that grew stranger and more silent with every mile. The ordinary sounds of the world falling away one by one until there was nothing left but the sound of your own footsteps on the ancient stone and the wind, which moves through this valley differently than wine moves anywhere else, more slowly, more deliberately, as though it is being careful not to disturb something that has been undisturbed for a very long time, and deserves to remain so. The mountains on either side of you are very close now, their dark slopes rising sharply from the valley floor in long, unbroken lines, and between them the sky is a narrow ribbon of deep blue-black, thick with stars that are brighter here than they are anywhere else you have been, as though the absence of every other kind of light has left more room for the starlight to assert itself and fill the available space completely. The grass on either side of the road is tall and silver and moves in the slow wind with a sound that is almost like breathing, almost like the very large and very slow breathing of something that is not quite asleep and not quite awake, but somewhere between the two, in the particular suspended stillness of a creature that has been resting for a very long time and has every intention of continuing. You stop at the top of a low rise in the valley floor and look out at what is spread before you, and for a long moment you simply stand there and let your eyes adjust to what they are seeing and let your mind do whatever it needs to do with what your eyes are reporting. The field extends from where you stand all the way to the far mountains, which in the darkness are visible only as a slightly darker darkness against the deep sky, and across the entire field, half submerged in the silver grass and the dark earth, are the bones. They are larger than you imagined, even though you imagine them large. Even the smallest of them, the ones that must have belonged to the youngest of the creatures who came here, are enormous by any scale you know, ribs that arch from the ground like the nave of a great cathedral, vertebrae the size of boulders polished smooth, skulls that face the sky with empty eye sockets large enough to stand inside, their jaws open in expressions that might be agony or might be relief. It is impossible to tell at this distance, and in this particular quality of starlit dark. The larger bones are almost beyond comprehension, even standing before them. There are spines that extend for hundreds of feet through the grass in great slow arcs. There are wings spread against the earth as though in the act of one final landing, as though the dragon that owned them simply folded them down one last time and did not open them again. And over all of it, the silver grass grows and moves, and the stars burn above, and the valley is filled with a silence so complete and so ancient it feels like something sacred. You walk down from the rise and into the field, and immediately the quality of the air changes around you in ways that take a moment to identify. It is warmer here than it should be, noticeably warmer than the air on the road above. A warmth that comes not from the sky or from any source you can see, but from the ground itself, from the dark earth between the roots of the silver grass, as though something deep below is still, after all this extraordinary time, producing heat, still generating warmth in some form that does not require the usual apparatus of fire or combustion, but simply persists because persistence is what it does. The smell of the air is different too, something ancient and mineral and faintly, very faintly, like wood smoke, though there is no fire anywhere visible, like the memory of fire preserved in the stone and bone of the valley, the way certain smells are preserved in old wood or old cloth, absorbed into the material decades and centuries ago and releasing still, slowly, into the air of every night. You walk carefully at first, stepping around the smaller bones that protrude from the earth at surface level, pieces of claw and scale, and the delicate curved bones of wing fingers, each one still hard and dense and dark, not crumbling as you might expect bones of this age to crumble, but solid and permanent and complete, as though whatever these creatures were made of was made specifically to outlast ordinary things by a significant margin. Around you, the larger structures rise from the silver grass, and you move between them the way you would move through a very old and very large forest, following the natural paths that the arrangement of bones creates, drawn forward by something that has no name. You find the place where you will sleep almost by accident, turning around the base of an enormous spine to find yourself in a natural hollow formed by the curve of a skull so large that its interior is the size of a small room in a comfortable house. The skull rests on its side, one eye socket facing upward toward the stars, the other pressed into the earth it has been resting on for longer than any human structure has stood anywhere in the world, its jaw slightly open, the teeth that remain, still sharp after all this unimaginable time, rising from the jaw like standing stones in a field, each one the height of a person. Inside the hollow of the skull, the silver grass grows in a thick, soft carpet, deeper and more uniform than the grass outside, as though it has been growing here undisturbed for an extremely long time and has reached some perfect state of growth it intends to maintain. The walls of bone around you are smooth and dark and very slightly warm to the touch when you press your palm against them. And when you hold your hand there, you feel something at the very edge of perception, a vibration so low and so slow that it exists below the threshold of sound, and is felt in the palm of the hand and the bones of the wrist rather than in the ear, a pulse that is nothing like a heartbeat, but has the same quality of regularity, the same quality of something continuing. You stand in the hollow and look up through the eye socket at the stars above, framed perfectly in the great oval of ancient bone, and you understand without deciding to that this is exactly where you are going to rest tonight. You lower yourself onto the carpet of silver grass inside the skull's hollow, and find it exactly as soft as it appeared, deep and yielding and warm from the heat of the earth below it. And you lie back and look up through the great eye socket at the extraordinary stars, and let the warmth of the place come up around you from every direction simultaneously, from the earth below and the bone walls beside you and the air itself, which inside the hollow is noticeably calmer than outside, sheltered from the slow wind by the curve of ancient skull wall, so that the only movement of air is the very faint movement of the grass stirred by your own breathing. The bone walls of the hollow give off their warmth with the steady patience of something that has been doing this for a very long time, a deep and even radiance that is not hot but profoundly comfortable, the kind of warmth that settles into muscles and the spaces between bones and stays there without fading, that maintains itself with the same unhurried steadiness as everything else in this valley. Above you, through the eye socket, the stars are extraordinary in their number and their brightness. You can see more of them from here than from anywhere else, not just more but different, arranged in patterns that seem almost familiar but are not quite any constellation you have been taught to recognize, as though the sky is seen from this specific valley through this specific aperture in this specific ancient bone is slightly different from the sky as seen from anywhere else in the world, which it may well be. The warmth that comes from the earth beneath you is unlike any warmth you have felt before in any place or in any season. It is not the warmth of a fire or a blanket or another body's heat, not the warmth of the sun stored in stone and released slowly through the course of a night, but something older and more fundamental than any of those familiar warmths, something that feels as though it comes from the very center of the earth itself, from the deep geological processes that produce heat without flame and maintain it without fuel across timescales that dwarf anything biological. You feel it most strongly in your back and your legs, the parts of you in direct contact with the deep warm grass, but it spreads from there through the rest of you gradually and thoroughly, finding its way into your shoulders and your arms and the back of your neck and the soles of your feet, not quickly, but with the patient completeness of something that has all the time available and intends to use it wisely. Around you, the bone walls of the hollow give off their own warmth as well, adding to the warmth from below, and the combined effect is of being held inside something warm and solid and very old, something that has been warm since before there were words for warmth, something that will continue to be warm long after the last fire has gone out in the last city of whatever civilization comes last. You lie in the grass, and the warmth holds you from all directions and asks nothing in return for this holding, which is the best kind of holding there is. You become aware of the breathing gradually, the way you become aware of sounds that have been present all along but required a certain quality of stillness to perceive. Not because it is loud, it is the opposite of loud. It is almost inaudible, a presence felt in the chest before it is heard by the ear, a quality of the air that has a rhythm to it, a rising and a falling over spans of several minutes that you would not notice if you were moving or talking or thinking about something else. But you are doing none of those things, and so you notice it, and once noticed it cannot be unnoticed. The valley breathes, in long slow cycles that are measured in minutes rather than seconds, an inhalation that lasts for what might be 3 or 4 minutes, and an exhalation equally long, the ground beneath you rising and falling by some infinitesimal degree with each cycle, the warm air in the hollow moving very gently in and then very gently out. The source of the breathing is everywhere simultaneously, which is to say it has no source and is instead simply the property of the valley as a whole. The way temperature is the property of a room rather than of any individual object in it. The entire valley breathes, and you are inside the breath, and the breath is warm and ancient and entirely without urgency. And your own breathing, you notice after a while, has begun to synchronize with it, slowing to match the much slower rhythm of the valley's great slow breath. Your lungs taking their cue from something immeasurably larger than themselves. Through the eye socket above you, the stars continue their slow movement across the dark sky, and you watch them with the soft, unfocused attention of someone who is not trying to see anything specific, but is simply receiving whatever the sky chooses to offer. Not tracking any individual star, but receiving the overall impression of that patch of sky, its depth and its brightness, and its particular character here above this valley, which is different from its character as seen from anywhere else you have looked at a night sky. The stars here seem closer than they usually seem, not in any measurable or demonstrable way, but in the felt sense of proximity that comes sometimes when you are very still and the ordinary business of being a person in the world has temporarily been set aside. The light they give off is not quite white here, but has a very faint quality of silver to it, the same silver as the grass of the valley floor, as though the grass and the starlight have been in some form of correspondence for so long that they have come to resemble each other, each taking on some quality of the other over the long years of their coexistence. Some of the stars are moving in ways that are not quite the slow movement of the celestial sphere, crossing the visible patch of sky in arcs that are too quick for stars, but too slow and too deliberate for anything else you can name. And you watch these moving lights with a curiosity that is entirely calm, because nothing in this valley has suggested that anything here requires a different response than calm. From where you lie, you can see through the opening of the jaw to the other bones visible in the field beyond the hollow, their shapes rising against the star-bright sky in silhouettes that are simultaneously familiar in their general form and completely alien in their specific scale. The shapes of creatures that existed at a magnitude that made everything else in the world small by comparison. The nearest visible bone from your position is a section of spine, curving up from the earth and then back down in a long, slow arc. Each vertebra the size of a large wagon and just as solid. The spaces between them just wide enough for the silver grass to grow thickly in the shelter they provide from the slow wind. Beyond the spine, the fan of a wing, its finger bones extending against the sky like the spars of some great ship, each one as long as a tall tree and far thicker, the bones dark against the stars, and still perfectly articulated after all this time. Further still, barely distinguishable in the distance, the domed shape of another skull, this one considerably larger than the one you are lying in, large enough that the hollow you currently occupy could fit inside it with room remaining. You look at these shapes for a long time and feel something that is not quite awe and not quite fear, but exists below and between both. The particular quality of smallness that comes from being in the presence of something genuinely and comprehensively larger than yourself, and finding that smallness restful. The grass in the hollow is extraordinary under your hands when you let your fingers move through it slowly, each blade cool and smooth on its surface, but warm at the base where it meets the earth. And the overall sensation of lying in it is of something that is simultaneously cool and warm, simultaneously soft and substantial, the blades bending under your weight without breaking, supporting you with a resilience that seems disproportionate to their apparent delicacy. The color of the grass in the starlight is one of those colors that refuses to be fixed, a silver that is also somehow deeply green, a green that carries within it a gray and a blue and something else entirely that has no name in any color vocabulary you know. A color that exists at the intersection of several other colors without quite being any of them. A color that you suspect exists only in this valley and only at night and only under these particular stars when they are at their brightest. When the slow wind moves through the hollow, it brings a wave through the grass from one side to the other and back again. And the sound of this movement is the softest sound you have encountered all night. Softer than your own breathing, softer than the low pulse in the bone walls. A sound that is almost silence given a very slight texture. The sound of the world being very still and the stillness having a voice of its own, speaking in a register so low and so slow that it reaches you not as sound, but as a quality of the air and the darkness around you. You find yourself thinking in the loose and drifting way of a mind that is no longer holding very tightly to the structured business of being awake and purposeful about what these creatures were when they were alive and in the world. Not the dragons of stories, not the ones that hoard gold in mountain fortresses and burn cities on a whim and require the intervention of heroes to destroy, but the actual creatures whose actual bones surround you now in this actual valley. The ones who lived in a world that existed before your world was imagined. They must have been extraordinary in ways that go beyond the evidence of their bones, though the bones alone are enough to establish something extraordinary. The sheer scale of them, the density of the material they were made of, the engineering of the wing structure, and the skull capacity, and the arrangement of the spine, all of it pointing toward creatures that operated at an order of magnitude beyond anything currently living anywhere in the world. And yet they came here, all of them, eventually, drawn by whatever draws very old and very large things to their final stopping place. And they laid down in this valley with its silver grass and its warm earth and its particular quality of air and its extraordinary stars, and they did not rise again. And the valley, being what it is, absorbed them with complete thoroughness, and has been warm with their warmth and alive with their life force in its new diffuse form ever since, which is a very long time indeed. The pulse in the bone walls of the hollow is clearer to you now than it was when you first lay down, either because it has strengthened or because you have become more attuned to it, your own nervous system having quieted enough in the intervening time to perceive something it could not perceive before through the ordinary noise of waking awareness. It is very slow, this pulse, much slower than a heartbeat, a cycle that takes perhaps 2 full minutes to complete from one peak to the next, a gathering and then a releasing, a slight increase in the warmth and pressure of the bone walls, and then a slight decrease, over and over in that long, slow rhythm. You can feel it most clearly with your hands when they rest flat against the warm grass that lies against the bone. And once you have tuned to it, you find that you can feel it everywhere simultaneously, in your back through the grass, and in your shoulders through the air, and in your chest as a very low vibration that is more sensation than sound, occupying a frequency so far below hearing that it communicates directly with the body rather than passing through the ear at all. Your own heartbeat, you notice, has been slowing since you lay down. It has been tracking downward towards some lower and more sustainable rhythm, drawn in the direction of slower by the example of everything around it, the slow breath of the valley and the slow pulse of the bone and the slow movement of the stars in the sky above. The quiet of the dragon's graveyard is not the quiet of an empty place, which is the only kind of quiet most people have experienced. It is the quiet of a very full place in which everything present has simultaneously entered a state of rest, in which the fullness of the place has set aside its usual expression and taken up instead the quieter and more complete expression of deep collective stillness. You are part of that stillness now. You are one more element of the valley's nighttime quiet, one more warm body in the silver grass beneath the ancient stars, contributing your own small and particular heat to the accumulated warmth of the valley, your own slow breathing to the slow breathing of the night, your own quieting heartbeat to the low pulse that moves through the earth and the bones and the air with the patience of something that has been pulsing since before anyone was around to notice. The mountains on either side of the valley are perfectly still. The stars are moving, but so slowly their movement is impossible to catch directly, perceptible only by comparison with their position at some earlier point in the night. The silver grass around you shifts in the barely there wind. The bone walls of the hollow hold their warmth. The eye socket above frames the extraordinary sky. Everything is exactly as it is. This is enough. This is more than enough. There is a smell in the air of the hollow that you have been aware of since you first lay down, but have not until this quieter and more receptive moment tried to properly identify. A smell that is faint and complex and unlike anything in your immediate ordinary experience, but deeply familiar in some way that bypasses the usual categories of memory and recognition and goes directly to something older in you than memory, something that might be instinct or might be the accumulated experience of a species over a span of time so long it cannot be reckoned individually. It is the smell of fire that has been out for a very long time, not the smell of ash or char, which are the residues of fire, but the smell of the fire itself, somehow preserved in the stone and bone and compressed earth of the valley the way certain smells are preserved in old materials, absorbed into the substance of things long ago and releasing still, slowly, as the warmth of the earth draws them out night after night across the centuries. Even now, so far removed from the last fire that was ever lit here, the air carries this ghost of warmth and ancient combustion, not unpleasant, but profoundly evocative of something powerful that is no longer dangerous, something that was once the most dangerous thing in the world and is now a memory so old it has become indistinguishable from the smell of the earth itself, available to whoever is quiet enough and still enough and present enough to receive it through the ordinary channels of breath. The eye socket above you is perfectly oval, its rim thicker than the surrounding skull bone and slightly smoother, reinforced in the careful way that important structures are reinforced by creatures that understood what was important and built accordingly. And through this oval aperture the stars are arranged in a configuration that seems, the longer you observe it without trying to read it, increasingly as though it was arranged specifically for observation from this specific vantage point. The particular set of stars visible through the oval of this ancient bone is not any constellation you know from any chart or any clear night you have spent looking upward, but it has the unmistakable quality of stars that belong together, that have some relationship to one another that makes them a group rather than a random sample of what the sky contains at this latitude and this hour. You look at this arrangement with eyes that have grown very soft and very wide in their focus, not trying to parse it or name it or fit it into any existing category, just looking the way you look at a fire or at moving water, without purpose but not without attention, and something arrives that is not a meaning but is adjacent to meaning. A feeling of being regarded from an enormous distance by something that has no needs and no agenda and no expectations and simply watches with the complete and patient attention of things that have been watching for a very long time. You are not alone in the valley tonight. You understand this without having seen anyone else and without any specific evidence you could point to if asked, but with the particular certainty of something that is felt rather than observed. The way you know there are people sleeping in nearby rooms even when the house is completely silent and dark. There are others here, other travelers who found the road that does not appear on any map and followed it through the strangening country to this valley and found their own hollows in the silver grass among their own chosen bones and lay down and are doing now what you are doing, which is giving themselves over to the extraordinary hospitality of this place and receiving what it offers. You cannot see them and you cannot hear them, but you can feel the quality of their presence in the valley the way you can feel the presence of sleeping people nearby. Not their specific identities or their particular histories or their reasons for being here, but the simple and deeply comforting fact of other warm bodies resting in the same large and ancient stillness, contributing their small individual warmths to the collective warmth of the night, their slow breathings to the slow breathing of everything. This is the specifically human comfort of not being alone in the dark, carried here into the most extraordinary of all possible resting places, and it is no less valuable for being carried so far. The earth beneath you is not simply earth, though it performs all the functions of earth with complete competence. It is the accumulated substance of everything that has happened in this valley over a span of time that the human mind cannot actually contain, but can gesture toward with words like primordial and immemorial and before the beginning of what we call history. The dragons came here for reasons that no record explains, drawn by whatever draws very old things to their ending place. And the earth received their enormous bodies and held them and worked on them over thousands of years, breaking down the soft materials into the minerals and compounds that enriched the valley soil, retaining the bones because the bones were designed to resist exactly this kind of dissolution, retaining the heat because the heat too seemed disinclined to simply dissipate into the cold of the high mountain air. All of this deep history is beneath you now, beneath the silver grass and the warm grassroots and the dark, rich earth. A record written not in any language that uses symbols, but in the language of geology and chemistry and the slow physical processes of the world, which is in many ways a more complete and more honest record than anything written in symbols, because it cannot be falsified and cannot be lost, and does not depend on anyone choosing to preserve it. You are resting on all of this. The history is warm. The wind that moves through the dragon's graveyard has a voice that is unlike any voice the wind has in other places, because in other places the wind moves through grass and leaves and the surfaces of buildings and natural stone formations, all of which give it something to say, all of which impose their own character on the sound it makes. Here the wind has all of those surfaces and one more, the bones, which give it something that grass and leaves and stone cannot give, a resonance that is lower and more complex, a series of tones that emerge from the hollows and channels of the ancient bone structures as the wind finds its way through them. Where the wind passes through the smaller bones, it produces higher notes, thin and clear. Where it passes through the great hollow vertebrae, it produces something much lower, a sound that you feel as much as hear, a bass note that occupies the same frequency as the pulse in the walls of your hollow, as though the wind and the earth are playing the same note through different instruments. And over all of this, the wind through the silver grass produces its continuous soft sibilance, and the three sounds together, grass and bone and deep vibration, make the music of this specific valley on this specific night. The music that has been playing here since the first bones fell, and will be playing here long after the last traveler who finds this place has come and rested and gone. Your body has been making its adjustments since you lay down, the small continuous corrections toward the most complete rest it can achieve, and it has largely finished that work by now. The process was gradual and mostly imperceptible as it happened, each muscle releasing in sequence or in small groups. The larger muscle groups first, and then the smaller ones, the ones in the shoulders and the back and the long muscles of the legs, and then the smaller ones, the muscles of the hands and the face and the muscles around the eyes that you did not know were holding anything until you noticed that they had stopped. Your shoulders are lower now than they were when you first lay down, lower by some degree that is small in measurement, but significant in its felt quality. The difference between a body that is prepared for the next thing that requires it and a body that has genuinely released the expectation that any next thing is coming. Your hands are open. Your jaw is unclenched. The space behind your eyes, which usually holds a certain amount of ambient tension, has softened and released that tension into the warm air of the hollow. And what remains in its place is something that could be called emptiness, but is better described as openness. The quality of a space that has been cleared and is available, but is not waiting for anything in particular, not anticipating, not ready. Simply open and warm and present. If the valley breathes, and it does, and if that breath is in some meaningful sense the breath of the dragons who have been incorporated into its earth, then what the valley dreams in its long, slow sleep is in some meaningful sense the dreams of those dragons. You do not know what dragons dreamed. Nobody knows this. The evidence for what they were like when alive is limited to bones and the impressions left in the landscape of very large and very old animals moving through it. But lying in the warm hollow with the slow pulse in the walls and the valley breathing around you and the stars moving above, you find that you have an impression of it anyway. The way you sometimes have impressions of things you have no factual access to, an overall sense of quality and character without specific content. The dragons dreamed of flight. This seems certain in the way that some things feel certain without being arguable. They dreamed of the specific quality of cold, clean air at altitude, very thin and very clear, and the particular physical sensation of being held up by that air with the wings spread wide and the body relaxed into the movement of soaring, the kind of flight that requires almost no effort, that is simply a matter of adjusting to what the air is already offering. They dreamed of the world seen from above at a scale that reveals its true nature, which is very large and very various and full of things that are beautiful in ways only visible from sufficient distance. And something of that dream is available here, at the edges of your own sleep, offered by the ground you lie on. The night has reached its deepest point, the hour that is furthest from both the previous sunset and the coming sunrise, the hour that belongs most completely and unreservedly to the night itself rather than to the transitions that bracket it. The stars above, as seen through the eye socket of the skull, have moved from their earlier position, the slow rotation of the earth having carried you and the valley and all the bones partway through the arc of the night. The configuration visible through the oval aperture is different from what it was when you first lay down, though you did not notice the transition, which is how such transitions happen when you are sufficiently still and sufficiently absorbed in the quality of being somewhere rather than in watching it change. The warmth of the earth has not diminished. The pulse in the bone walls has not changed its rhythm. The wind continues its long conversation with the silver grass and the ancient bones. Everything continues as it was, and as it has been, and as it will be long after this night is over, and you have returned to whatever road brought you here and moved on in whatever direction that road suggests. The middle of the night is the best time to be in a place like this, in a place that is defined by continuity and patience, and the long, slow persistence of things that do not require the day. There is nothing here that waits for morning. The bones around you have been here for longer than human civilization has existed in any of its forms. Longer than agriculture, which is to say longer than settled life, longer than the domestication of animals, longer than the first shaped stone tool, longer than fire deliberately made rather than opportunistically used. They were here, in this valley, warming in whatever sun shone then, and cooling in whatever nights fell, absorbing rain and frost, and the particular mineral content of this specific valley's specific air, before the first human being looked up at a night sky and had any thought at all about what the lights might be. This is not a fact intended to make you feel insignificant, though it does, inevitably, produce that feeling as a side effect. It is a fact intended to offer you a different scale, temporarily, in place of the scale you usually operate at, which is the scale of a single human life, which is very short. At the scale of this valley and these bones and this earth, the things that feel urgent at the human scale reveal themselves as the brief and local arrangements they actually are, and the things that feel permanent reveal themselves as the temporary configurations of matter and energy they actually are, and what remains after this rescaling is a kind of lightness. The lightness of a person who has temporarily set down the weight of being important at their own scale and picked up instead the weightlessness of being a very small and very brief visitor in a very large and very patient world. The silver grass beneath you has now fully conformed to the shape of your body, each blade bent in the precise direction that accommodates whatever part of you rests on it, so that the surface beneath you is a perfect negative impression of yourself, a mold made of living material that holds you with a precision that would require considerable deliberate engineering to achieve in any other material. The warmth that comes through this grass from the deep earth below is evenly distributed across the entire contact surface of your back and your legs, no point warmer or cooler than any other. A thermal evenness that your body receives with a satisfaction that is difficult to articulate, but very easy to feel. The satisfaction of a system in equilibrium, of a body and an environment that have found their exact correspondence after a period of mutual adjustment and are now simply resting in that correspondence. The grass has a smell that you notice when you breathe slowly and deeply enough to receive it, a green and mineral smell with something sweet underneath it, the smell of plants that grow in soil made from something extraordinary, that take up through their roots the minerals and compounds of ancient fire and flight and incorporate them into their own substance. The silver color of this grass is not coincidental. It is the color of something that has grown from dragons, that has been growing from dragons for longer than most things have been growing from anything. The border is near now. You can feel its approach not as a distinct threshold getting closer, but as a progressive softening of the distinction between where you are and where you are going, the boundary between waking and sleeping becoming gradually less definite, more permeable, the two states beginning to bleed into each other at their edges in the way that colors bleed into each other when they are placed side by side on wet paper. Your thoughts, such as they still are, have the texture of thoughts that no longer belong entirely to you, that have been loosened from the usual architecture of yourself and are available to currents and influences beyond your own. You are not directing your thoughts. You are watching them arrive and pass the way you watch clouds from a comfortable position on the ground, with interest but without attachment, without the need to hold on to any of them or follow any of them to wherever they might lead. What arrives is the graveyard, in various forms. The warmth, the bones visible through the jaw of the hollow, the stars through the eye socket, the slow breath of the valley, the pulse in the walls, the silver grass, all of it coming to you now not as a landscape to be observed from outside, but as a medium you are floating in, a substance that surrounds you completely and is the same temperature as you are and asks nothing of you and gives everything it has, freely and without condition. The last clearly formed thoughts before the border is crossed are always the strangest, the ones that exist at the exact edge between waking and sleeping and therefore belong to neither state and both simultaneously, that have the linear quality of waking thought and the imagistic quality of dreaming thought all at once, that feel significant and true in the moment of their occurrence in a way that will be impossible to recover or reconstruct upon waking. Your last clearly formed thoughts in the hollow of the dragon's skull in the dragon's graveyard, with the warm earth pressing up through the silver grass and the ancient bone walls pulsing with their slow heat, and the stars moving in their extraordinary patterns through the frame of the eye socket above you, are not thoughts at all, strictly speaking, but a feeling that arrives in the form of a thought, the feeling of having arrived somewhere that you have been, without knowing it, on the way, to for a very long time. Not this specific place, not this specific valley, but this specific quality of rest, this complete and unconditional permission to stop, to release, to be held by something larger than yourself that requires nothing of you in return for the holding except that you accept it. You have been on the way to this permission for as long as you have been tired, and you have arrived. And it is exactly what you thought it might be, and also something more than that. Something that cannot be anticipated from the road that leads here, but can only be known from within the hollow, in the warmth, in the dark, under the stars. You are going now. The direction of sleep is always down, through the progressively quieter layers of lighter rest into the deep country below. And you are going willingly, without any of the small resistances that sometimes accompany the approach of sleep, the thoughts that present themselves as urgent, the awareness that snags on something and insists on following it back to the surface. There is nothing here to snag on. There is only the warmth and the slow pulse and the stars growing very slightly dimmer as your eyes close more completely and more permanently, the grass soft beneath every part of you, the bone walls steady and warm on either side, the long slow breath of the valley moving around you and taking you with it, in and out, in the rhythm that has been going on here since before you arrived, and will continue going on here long after you have left, carrying you down through the layers of the night as easily and as naturally as a river carries whatever rests on it downstream, without effort, without decision, simply because that is the direction things go when they are no longer fighting the current, and you have entirely stopped fighting the current, and the current is very warm, and it knows exactly where it is taking you. In the space that opens below waking, something happens that is specific to this place, that belongs to this valley and these bones and this particular quality of night, and does not happen in other places where other people sleep. You dream of flight, not the anxious lurching flight of ordinary anxiety dreams, not the bewildering disorientation of finding yourself suddenly airborne in a context that makes no sense, but the real and specific sensation of sustained deliberate flight, the physical feeling of a body held up by air with the wings spread wide and the world below at the correct distance, and the movement through the air effortless and complete. The valley is below you, and from above you can see it whole, the silver grass and the dark bones, and the encircling mountains, and the road that does not appear on maps winding through the forest below the valley entrance, and scattered through the silver grass, the small warm shapes of the other sleeping travelers, each one in their own hollow, each one dreaming this same dream that the valley gives to whoever is still and quiet enough to receive it. The gift of the perspective of the creatures, whose bones made this valley what it is. The gift of height and the vision that comes with height. The gift of seeing the world at its true scale, which is very large and very beautiful and has room enough in it for everything, including this night, including you, including the long and generous dark. Below the dream, below the flight and the stars and the world seen from above at its true scale, there is only the valley, and the valley holds you in the way that valleys hold everything, which is completely and without condition and with the patience of something that has been holding things for longer than there have been things to hold. The valley does not ask how you arrived or what you did before you got here or what you intend to do when you leave. It holds you with the same complete and unconditional embrace it has given to every traveler who ever found the road and followed it to this place. The same embrace it has given to the bones of the extraordinary creatures who chose it as their final resting place. The same embrace it gives to the silver grass and the warm, deep earth and the stars that look down at all of it with their cold and patient light. You are held within this holding, nested inside it, held by the warm hollow of the skull, which is held by the field of bones, which is held by the valley, which is held by the mountains, which are held by the earth, which is held by whatever holds the earth. The whole arrangement a series of holdings, each nested within the next, each one complete and secure, and at the very center of all of it, small and warm and breathing very slowly in the silver grass, you. When the dragons died, what remained was not nothing, and this is the central fact of the dragon's graveyard. The fact the place exists to demonstrate with its continued warmth and its silver grass and its pulsing bone walls night after night across the uncountable years. What remained was warmth. The warmth is still here, rising through the earth and the grass and the walls of every hollow in this field. What remained was the structure of their bodies, preserved in bone that has outlasted everything else about them and will outlast everything about you as well. Bones that show no signs of the dissolution that takes everything else eventually. What remained was the particular heat they produced while alive, absorbed into the geology of the valley and releasing still. And what remained, most importantly and least explicably, was something that resists any name you might give it, something that is the signature of having been fully and completely alive at the largest possible scale, something that does not dissipate when the life that produced it ends but changes form instead. From the concentrated and fierce aliveness of a living dragon to the diffuse and patient aliveness of a valley and an earth and a quality of air, spread thin across an enormous area but present still, warm still, communicating itself still to whoever is quiet enough and still enough and open enough to receive it. This is what you have received tonight. This is what the warmth is. The hour before dawn is the hour that belongs most completely to deep sleep, the hour when the body goes furthest from the surface of waking into the restoration that the night offers, when the distance between where the conscious mind usually lives and where the sleeping self has gone is at its greatest. In the dragon's graveyard, this hour has qualities that distinguish it from the same hour in other places. The warmth from the earth increases slightly in this hour, as though the earth itself is aware of the coming transition and is offering its best warmth while the night still belongs entirely to the night. The wind in the silver grass has slowed almost to nothing, so that the valley is quieter than it has been all night. The only sounds the barely perceptible pulse in the bone walls and the very slow breathing of the sleeping travelers distributed through the field in their various hollows. The stars above the eye socket are at their brightest, the sky having reached its maximum darkness in this final hour before the first light begins its slow advance from the east. In this brightness, in this quiet, and this warmth, the valley is most completely itself, most fully resting, most entirely at peace, and you are most completely at peace within it, nested in the hollow of the ancient skull, warm and still, and breathing the slow breath of someone who is not going anywhere. The bones remember. This is not metaphor. It is as close to a literal statement as the circumstances allow. Bone is one of the most durable structures that biological processes produce, built to maintain its form across pressures and time spans that destroy softer materials completely. And in maintaining its form, it maintains something else, a quality that is not quite memory in the sense of stored retrievable information, but functions like memory in the sense of preserving something of what the living creature was like, communicating it forward through time in the only language available to bone, which is the language of structure and warmth and the slow vibration that you have been feeling in the walls of your hollow all night. The skull you are lying in remembers the head it enclosed and the mind that head contained and the life that mind experienced over whatever span of years this particular dragon lived. And in remembering this, it communicates it in the only way it can, through warmth and vibration and the particular quality of the air inside it, saying in the only language currently available to it that something was here, that something large and warm and alive was here, that the being alive was good, that the ending when it came was not a loss but a completion, that the valley received everything that was given to it with gratitude and has been holding it with care through all the years since, and will continue to hold it through all the years to come, in the warm earth and the silver grass and the pulsing bones. There is a depth of sleep that exists below dreaming, that lies deeper than the level at which the mind produces any content, images or narratives, or the half-formed thoughts of lighter sleep. A depth that is pure restoration without story, pure biological maintenance without any experiential dimension. The body and the brain doing their essential work in a silence that is total and a darkness that is without gradation or quality. This is where you are now, or as close to it as the peculiarity of this place allows, which is not quite the ordinary dreamless sleep of ordinary nights, but something that partakes of it while retaining the quality of the valley around you, a deep rest that is also in some sense the deep rest of the valley itself, indistinguishable at this depth from the long collective rest of everything that has ever lain down in this field and given itself over to what the valley offers. The valley around you continues without your awareness. The stars continue. The slow pulse in the bones continues. The silver grass breathes in the barely there wind. All of it continues without you, without your attention or participation, which is the correct state of affairs, which is what this place is for, which is what the long patience of the bones and the warm generosity of the earth and the slow breath of the valley have always been offering to whoever lies down in the silver grass and accepts the offer completely. The mountains that enclose the valley are, in the way of mountains, always awake, always present, always unchanged in any way that a human lifetime could detect. performing the same function they have performed since they rose from the collision of geological plates in some epoch so remote it has no relation to anything in human experience. They hold the valley. This is what they do, the single function that defines them in relation to this specific place, to stand on all four sides with their enormous mass and hold the valley within their embrace and shelter it from the winds that come from outside, and provide the watershed that feeds the underground warmth and stand as the permanent border between this valley and the rest of the world, a border that is also a protection, a statement in stone that says this place is separate, this place is held apart. This place has a different relationship to time and change than the places beyond the mountains. You are within that border now, within the holding of mountains that were old when the world was young. Within the valley they have been enclosing since before there were eyes to see them do it, sheltered by their mass from winds you cannot hear, warmed by the watershed they create, held in the valley they hold, sleeping in the warmth they help to maintain, completely and without reservation within the protection they provide without intention or awareness, simply by being what they are and standing where they stand. Morning is coming, as it always comes, from the east, where the sky is beginning to show, not light yet, but the precursor of light, the absence of the deepest dark at a thin strip of the horizon that marks where the sun will eventually be visible. In the dragon's graveyard, morning arrives in a particular way that is different from morning anywhere else. The silver grass, which has been silver all night because of the starlight that has soaked into it over so many centuries, begins to show its true green in the first faint light, not abruptly, but gradually, the silver fading back into the color that daylight reveals, a deep and extraordinary green that is the green of soil made from something remarkable. The bones, which have been dark and mysterious in the night, will show in the morning light their true palette of ivory and amber and the warm gray of ancient things, beautiful in the daylight in ways that are completely different from their beauty in the dark, warmer and more complex and more comprehensible, but no less astonishing. The stars will fade, the extraordinary stars, the stars that are brighter here than anywhere else. But morning is still at the edge of the sky, and the night still belongs to itself, and you are still deep within the gift that the night gives, and morning, when it comes, will come gently and give you all the time you need. The dragon's graveyard gives something to everyone who sleeps here. This is not legend or wishful thinking, but the report of everyone who has ever found the road and followed it to this valley and lain down in the silver grass among the bones and given themselves over to the warmth and the slow pulse and the starlight through the eye sockets of ancient skulls. What it gives is different for every person who receives it, shaped to what each person most needs, drawn from the vast accumulated wealth of everything that was ever given up in this valley, which is to say, everything, the full lives of the most extraordinary creatures ever to inhabit this world, given to the earth completely and without reservation. What it gives you tonight will not be immediately apparent. You will not wake knowing what you received. You will carry it back out through the mountains on the road that does not appear on maps and back through the strangening country to wherever you came from, and some days or weeks or months later, in the middle of some ordinary activity in some ordinary place, you will find that something is different, that something that was depleted has been restored, that something that was off has been rebalanced, that something that was lost has come back, and you will know in that moment that this is what the valley gave you, and you will remember, or something and you will remember, the warmth in the dark and the slow breathing of the most ancient resting place in the world. You are very deep now, deeper than you have been at any point in this night. The surface of waking so far above you it has no relevance, no pull, no claim on any part of your attention. The deep country of sleep surrounds you in every direction without boundary or limit, warm and still and without content. The kind of rest that is below experience, below sensation, below anything that could be remembered or described. Pure restoration happening at the level where restoration happens, which is below the level of consciousness entirely. The pulse in the bone walls is with you here too, translated from the physical into the essential, present not as a sensation of vibration in your hands or back, but as a quality of the deep rest itself. A rhythm that is the rhythm of the world operating at its most fundamental level. A heartbeat so slow and so large that it encompasses everything. The valley and the mountains and the earth below and the sky above and you, small and warm and breathing your slow breath in the silver grass and the hollow of the skull and the field of bones in the extraordinary valley where the dragons came to rest, held in the holding that has held everything that has ever come here, quietly and permanently and without condition. For as long as this valley has been a valley and the bones have been bones, and the silver grass has been silver in the light of these stars. And so the night completes itself, as nights have always completed themselves in the dragon's graveyard, without announcement, without ceremony, in the same slow and patient way that everything here completes itself, drawing its final darkness around the valley and the bones, and the sleeping travelers and the silver grass, and the warm earth, and holding all of it together in the deepest part of the night before releasing it, gradually, into whatever comes next, which is morning, which is always. Morning, which is always a release and a beginning and the start of another road leading somewhere new. You are held until then. The valley holds you until then, as it has held everything that has ever lain down in it, as it will hold everything that will ever lie down in it in all the years and centuries and ages to come, with the same warmth and the same patience and the same complete and unconditional welcome. Among the bones of the most extraordinary creatures that ever lived, in the warmth of the oldest earth, under stars that have no names in any language you know, in the valley where the world's greatest things came at the end of everything to lay down their enormous tired bodies and rest at last. You are resting too, you small and brief and entirely sufficient visitor. You traveler who found the road that does not appear on maps and followed it here through the dark and the silence and the silver grass. This is the dark lore. Sleep well.